Welcome to our latest edition of CharitEpulse, our bi-weekly charity podcast. My name is Charles Mesquita, Charities Director at Quilter Investment Management. I'm delighted to be joined by one of my regular musketeers, James Saunders, Charity Partner at leading accountancy and audit firm, Moore Kingston Smith. Sadly, Catherine Ross-Jomji, our other musketeer, is under the weather, and we're wishing her a speedy recovery. However, we are joined today, and I'm really excited by this, by Joe Saxton, who is chair of the Association of Chairs, but is probably better known for being the founder of NFP Synergy, a research consultancy for charities, and has been a serial trustee and a serial chair of a number of charities, including the Institute of Fundraising, and has recently written a fantastic article for us on a great board is beating heart of every charity. So welcome, Joe.
Thank you. Very good to be here. Very good to meet you both and talk about all the exciting charity stuff we're going to talk about.
Excellent. Well, that's fantastic. Now, normally we explore the latest pressing issues, but today I think what I'd like to do is sort of focus on the recent consultation that the Association of Chairs has carried out, where you had over 600 respondents for it. Half of them were from charities with turnovers of less than £1 million. 55% of those who responded were over 55. 63% of them were female. And interestingly, 50% had master's degree or PhDs. And you had a good mixture of people responding, both chairs, trustees, and CEOs and others, or senior management from it. And I think, if I'm hopefully got it right, the key findings from that, Joe, were that about improving boards and governance, diversity and inclusion, culture of learning, so increasing that, and also behaviour of individual board members within that. And then what was low priority, which was possibly a bit of a surprise, was around paying trustees, developing qualifications for trustees, and chartered status. Hopefully that gives a reasonably good capture of it.
Yes.
So I think, Joe, what we might do is just start with what surprised you by the findings of the consultation, and what do you think you might do with this information?
I think one of the pleasant surprises was that we got a good response. It's always a worry with these things that you're going to have 10 people respond. You go, oh, is that really good enough? So we got a good response, and we got a good cross section, as you just said. That was really good. I think the unpleasant surprise that I had was that qualifications were so low down. I am fascinated by the fact that we want increasing levels of qualifications for staff, for fundraisers, for comms people, for chief executives, and so on. But we aren't yet saying, you know what, there should be some kind of qualification, never mandatory, but some kind of qualification to be a trustee. If somebody wants to be a trustee, they can't go, you know what, I've done this course and this gives me the background, the basics in being a trustee. So I was interested that was low down. I was pleased, partly for the reason of politics, that the pay issue came low down, because it's such a divisive issue. And I think what excites me is that the donation of time. How do we give people the time to be a trustee, the time to be a chair, if they're working, is a real issue. We've created a system in which we have voluntary trusteeships, and that means that people who have the time are more likely to do it. But we desperately need, if we want all sections of society to be included, to let people who are working, to let people who have young families, to have people who have other kinds of caring responsibilities also be trustees. And that means they have to have ways to give their time. And if you have 20 days holiday a year, you're quite noble if you give half of that to being a trustee.
Joe, what about the pressures of being a trustee and the pressures of responsibility I'm thinking of particularly? Because one of the things I've always struggled with is these are voluntary roles, unpaid roles, but they end up having ultimate responsibility for an organisation. There is a problem there, is there not? They are responsible for an organisation, but they are amateurs.
Yeah, there is a paradox. There is a paradox in a number of fronts. We want to give them all this legal responsibility. We are delighted that the voluntary nature of trusteeship is at the center of the governance of organizations, but we give them that responsibility. But we don't necessarily train them, which is why the learning culture is so important. I don't think I would ever use the term amateur because that has the wrong connotation, but these people are we need them to be unpaid professionals, and they may start as people who don't have all the skills that they needed. But yes, it is a paradox, and it goes worse than that, because when you look at ads for being a trustee, it will kind of go, well, you can do this in just 2 days a year, and you'll have 4 board meetings of 2 hours, and then you might have an away day, and that's all you need to give us. So on the one hand, we want people to take all these responsibilities. On the other hand, we kind of minimize because we want them to be trustees. We don't want them to feel it's a huge burden. We minimize the amount of time in some cases, and that's daft. And when I talk to chairs and trustees, a lot of them will say how much time they are putting in, and that's one of the paradoxes we face. You need time to be a good chair, you need time to be a good trustee, but we want to emphasize how little at times. So there's a recruitment mismatch as well sometimes.
Yeah, I mean, sort of speaking from personal experience, when things are going well, okay, with an organization, being a trustee is not particularly onerous. You can put the right amount of time in it for and as you term them, an unpaid professional. That's fine. When things go wrong, suddenly the time commitment from trustees as those responsible is extraordinary. And I speak as someone who has, as a trustee, had to go through enormous amounts of extra work and in areas that I have very little specialism in, because of the ultimate responsibility lies with the trustee in that position. And I think
Yeah,
that is
yeah.
where one of the things that might make a difference to me is having much more support for trustees when things go wrong.
I can hear the symphony of music in the background because you're saying exactly, yes, we need more support for trustees. And actually, you talk about the time it takes. COVID was the ultimate example of that. Suddenly, trustees are having to make huge numbers of very difficult decisions in very short order about furloughing people, about restructuring, about redundancies, all of that kind of stuff. So yes, sometimes trustees do, but there is more mundane stuff. You have a funding crisis, you have a challenge. I've been doing these interviews with people about conflicts on boards, and I've talked to chairs who have huge amounts of time when things go wrong, and if they can't spare it, then the whole organization can get held up by that difficulty of having time. So yes, when everything's on the straight and level, it's pretty straightforward. But actually, when you need to do more, when you need to tackle a particular set of challenges, it can be really difficult indeed. And that's where you need to work out who's got the time on the board, were they expecting it? And that's where you need to work out how you'll kind of square that circle.
I think we need to be a little careful, don't we, about the use of words when we talk about qualifications. And I'm afraid I'm somebody who doesn't have a degree and I don't have any A levels, but I'm still a chair of a board and that's in the top 100. So I think when we talk about qualifications, I think what we want is the sort of culture of learning, getting people to be inquisitive, but also it's a sort of a continuous professional development is what we're really looking for, rather than an exam certificate at the end of it would be my thought process. And the other thing, which I think links into this whole issue around should the government legislate so that employers have to give people a certain amount of time off for volunteering, which I think actually would be really good for people, is we possibly don't spend enough time shouting about the benefits of being a trustee. I just think about it from my perspective is that, I've had a lot of fun doing it. I've met people that I probably would have never met before. I have learned so much, but actually it's enhanced my ability as both as a human and from a work perspective. I reckon I'm a better manager because of the experience I've had over the last 20, 30 years of being a trustee. And I do think
no,
we
I think
spend
that's
enough
right.
time talking
And
about that.
you're absolutely right. And we should have more people who say, you know what, I'm not that interested in this charity, but I knew that being a trustee would be really good for my skills and my development. I could give them something from what I know, and they could make me something. One of the dangers, paradoxically, again, is that we have too many trustees who are only there because they care passionately about the cause. When we talk about diversity, we want people who say, I'm going to be on this board because I know I'll learn an awful lot. And actually, whether the cause is mediocre to me. Let's face it, I have done jobs that I didn't care that much about the cause because I thought it was good for my career. We should have the same for trusteeship as well.
How much could or should a chair of a board be involved in, make calls on the recruitment of trustees in light of, you want diversity or you want balance? I think if Catherine was here, she'd say, "Oh, you should definitely have a policy to follow on trustee recruitment." But there's more to it than that, isn't there? That you need to have interviews and make an assessment of character and personality and fit and that sort of thing, as well as perhaps Charles's suggestion of looking at background.
You definitely should have open and transparent recruitment. You definitely should say we would like these kind of people. You should definitely also work out how you use those people. In other words, if you're going to have an AI expert or a digital expert, you've got to use that expertise to great effect. I've been on boards where I think, what was the point of having me? You don't use me, and the things that I know about. I know lots about fundraising. You never ask me about fundraising, kind of thing. So if you are going to have people with those expertises, you have to work out how you make sure those skills are used to full effect. And sometimes that's saying, actually, one of the great advantages of having a trustee is they're effectively an unpaid consultant we can call on. It may not be that everything is all about the fiduciary duties. It may be just like, can we pick your brains about this? And so I think sometimes boards are a little bit too rigid in the staff do all the operations and the board does the strategy and the responsibility. Actually, trustees can be used in a whole multitude of ways to be highly beneficial for the organization.
Yeah, I mean, I must admit, I do with recruitment. I'm always a little bit cautious. It's a bit like saying that somebody should only be a trustee on a board for a particular length of time, because I think you need to have that sort of flexibility within it. And I know one of the complaints that I hear from a lot of charities is they find it difficult to recruit trustees. Now, I think a lot of time people aren't particularly imaginative about how they go about doing it, but I don't have any problems tapping somebody on the shoulder who you think is suitable, qualified, because they've got what you need and you don't need to go through a massive formal process. But I think there are other occasions where actually going through a formal process is massively beneficial because you get access to somebody that you wouldn't necessarily know. So yeah, I agree with you. I think that people, I think they have to deal with it. And it's, again, you use the word interview, James. I'm very careful about that. This to me is a two-way conversation, because you want somebody who's got particular skill sets, but also is going to fit in with the board from a chemistry point of view. One of the interesting, coming out of your survey was around individual behaviour of boards. Do you feel that, Joe, was to do with the Centre Barley case? That had
no, not specifically. That came after this one. It's because a lot of people go to board meetings and kind of see people who dominate the conversation. They see people who are rude or unpleasant or are not having respectful, constructive dialogue. And indeed, having done these interviews, I've heard the sort of extreme end of that. But if you are going to have a board, you need to make sure the board feels useful. You need to make sure the meetings listen to everyone. You need to make sure that people have a way of putting their opinions if they can't get to the meetings and so on. And so sometimes I think the board behaviors is about, some of those Nolan principles of basic standards. People have talked to me about how they don't really, their board didn't have a good conflict of interest policy, and people who were on the board were also supplying services, and nobody seemed to worry about that. So board behaviors is basically saying, and it's back to James's point, the more legal responsibility you give people, the more you need to make sure that the behaviors and the way people act are proper. I do think you should always be giving open and transparent interview processes and recruitment process. Doesn't mean you can't tap somebody on the shoulder and say, this is out at the moment, we think you'd be really good. And I do think you should also be absolutely, you call it an interview, call it a chat, but have that two-way process, because otherwise the danger is, Charles, the people you know are probably people who are quite like you. And that means you don't get the diversity. Whereas if you have something saying, we'd love to hear from a spectrum of people, you get a different kind of person. That's the reason that you do open and transparent recruitment. And if you never have term limits, you never get any new trustees. People say, but in the 1950s, we did this and it worked very well. And that's the danger. Not that I'm suggesting you're from the 1950s, Charles, but but that is the danger of having no term limits, not having new trustees, and only tapping on shoulders.
No, I wasn't, and I'm not advocating that. I'm actually advocating is that people should have 3-year but rolling, but you go through a formal process to whether that you have them for another 3 years, rather than saying it's a maximum of 9 or a maximum of whatever. Because I think there are trustees that, as long as they continue to add value. I mean, I do something good for every trustee charity where I become a trustee. I hand in a sealed envelope with my letter of resignation to the chair of trustees when I'm on appointment, and tell them to exercise it at any point where they think I've become redundant or useless on the board.
Oh,
now,
wow.
To be fair, it's never been open, never been exercised. But to me, that is quite an important thing, just to say that I only want to be here while I'm adding value.
That also suggests, Charles, you've always jumped before you were pushed.
Well, there have been occasions where I've tried to jump and not been allowed to, sadly. That's a thing. So Joe,
let me just tell you the things that we're doing as a result of this consultation. The first is on diversity. What we're beginning the process of saying, if we want trustees be more diverse, we should have a plan. The danger is, and the sector is prone to this, they think things happen by wishful thinking. We will become more diverse because we would all like us to be more diverse. We will raise more money because we'd all like to raise more money. If you want to do anything in life, you have to have a plan. So we're starting the process of saying, okay, let's try and have a plan for making trustee boards more diverse. What does that look like? What is diversity and so on? Because one of the dangers is when people hear the term diversity, they think you mean ethnicity, and actually it's so much broader than that. Age is one of the biggest areas. We know the average age of trustees is 65. That's what the latest Charity Commission for England and Wales data shows. 65, ridiculously old overall. So getting more younger people, getting more people who haven't got a master's degree, absurd level of qualifications in our survey. I'm sure not all trustees are like that, but we want more who just have A-levels and haven't got a degree and come from different kinds of background. We want people with disabilities. One of the biggest surprises is in today's online world, disability, it ought to be easier to be a trustee as a disabled person than it was 10 years ago. And we're not seeing that come through. So diversity is a whole range of things. But how do we do it? What do we need to do? Do we need to get grant makers to ask, what are you doing to make your board more diverse? Are you having term limits? Are you having open, transparent recruitment? So we are beginning to look at a plan for making, to get things so we can monitor progress, so we can look at what we're doing. That's the first thing. The second thing is we're working with the Charity Commission on board behaviours. They have a working group which is looking at it, and we're doing this project to look at board conflicts, which, if you like, is what happens when board behaviours go wrong. And I've been learning a lot doing these interviews about what it is that might help things. And one of the realizations I've had is that there's a Goldilocks level of conflict. There's a Goldilocks level of challenge. Too much challenge is a bad thing, and too little challenge. So when the chair and the chief executive stitch everything up, that's a bad thing. That's a bad board behavior and so on. So we need to have...
But Joe, we've talked about that actually in some of our recent chats about particularly around the chair, but also that how do you manage that conflict? There was a suggestion at one point, and I can't remember when we talked about it a few months ago, that there are chairs that often think of themselves as the final decision maker, as the ultimate authority on a board, which it just isn't how certainly I would look at it, and I don't think it's how it should be seen. You are first among equals, aren't you? You've got to build consensus and decisions rather than, as you described it, just then railroading through decisions on a minority.
Absolutely. And one of the difficult jobs of a chief executive and a chair is, what do you ask who about? In other words, there's some things actually the entire board doesn't need to be asked about, and there are some things the whole entire board should be asked about. And part of the judgment of the chair and chief executive is actually which of those do we have to ask everyone, and which of those shouldn't we? We've got a great member of staff. We're thinking about extending them for another year on a short-term contract. Does that need to go to the board at all in a small organization? Maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. That's partly cultural and so on. But we're thinking of changing the name of our organization. Yeah, of course, that should go to the entire board. Of course, that should be discussed, and for quite a few months in advance of any big decision. So part of the job of the chair is to work with others to say, okay, these are the areas that we are doing things in consultation, and this is where the chair is going to say, yeah, that's fine, increase that person's salary, hire that person, or whatever else it might be.
And on the, sorry, just following up on that, on the surveys and the work that you've done recently, those sort of two types of chair, if you like, the domineering one or the more conciliatory one, which is more common? I mean, do you find that generally chairs are more conciliatory, more collaborative, and the exception is the domineering one who runs through everything? Is that the right sort of ratio from what you can see?
I think in most organizations, there's a domineering person somewhere. Now, that may be the chief executive or that may be the chair. And indeed, if you have two domineering people, that's a recipe for things not working particularly well. But if you have neither person is going to say, right, this is where we're going, this is what we're doing, that's also a recipe for things not working so well. So those are problematic as well. I would have said that probably the vast majority of chairs are good at marshalling the resources of the board, doing things, and making the organization move forward. But in these interviews I've been doing, I've heard from people where both the chief executive has been too domineering, and the chair has been micromanaging, thinking they were really the chief executive, and so on. It's very hard to say which is the more common out of those two sides of things, I would say.
Which are you, Joe?
I don't think anyone would ever hire me to a board to say, let's have Joe, he'll make sure we continue business as normal.
Fair enough.
Change merchant. I must admit, there are two things that I've found that really help with board meetings. One is being very clear about what is day-to-day management and sits within the exec. So when you're discussing something, is this a piece of the executive is using you as a sounding board, or is it something that should sit with as part of the sort of trustee's role, which is more around the strategy? And sometimes there's not a huge amount of clarity on that. And the other one, actually, when I became chair of Prism the Gift Fund, have sort of changed the way we do meetings. So I don't go through any papers whatsoever. And in fact, the chief executive and I sort of focus or will agree on the three things that we want to focus on. And we've ended up having some really good conversations as a result of that. And also the feedback from our trustees and from the exec is that we're ending up with a much better outcomes and much better meetings as a result of it.
I think that's really, and I think one of the things we have to get away from is that there is a way of doing things on boards. You know, let's have lots of different meetings. Let's not have, you know, I talked to somebody the other day, say, we have all day board meetings. It's like, goodness me, you know, and we do have an obsession with meetings at trustees. You know, no chief executive post will ever be advertised saying you have 46 meetings in the course of a year. But we do that for trustees. Why are we obsessed that the only way you do these things is through a meeting? Why can't it be bilateral conversations between a trustee and a member of staff, or a trustee and a beneficiary? Why do we have to have everything focused around meetings with trustees? Why can't it be conversations, emails, WhatsApp things, listening, going to sessions? There are some things where we've really got stuck in the mud on trustees, and one of them is this obsession with meetings and how useful they are. And indeed, many organizations have they're written into it. You miss 3 meetings and you're toast, kind of thing, and that's not necessarily helpful. Having said that, you know, at the heart of it is 4 meetings a year. It's not a big thing, but the danger of people think all I've got to do to be a good trustee is turn up for 4 meetings. That's not good either.
Yeah, no, I think that's absolutely right. Joe, charities are in a really tough place at the moment.
Yeah.
Is there a roadmap out of this? Should there be a roadmap?
Well, if there is a roadmap, it's well hidden, is all I can say. So they are, and if you look at almost any front, but particularly finance. I'm doing a project working with my old company, now NFP Research and Bayes Business School, and we're looking at the risks to the charity sector. We said, what are the things that give you challenges and what are the opportunities? And the results will be coming out later. But top of the tree is money. This sounds like a strange thing to say, but charities are quite obsessed by money. And one of the dangers is that the way you change the world is not necessarily about the size of your organization, but growth of organization is quite a high priority for a lot of organizations, and that is seen to be the way you do things. So money is clearly a problem. But if you look across a number of other things, what are we going to do about AI? That's a bigger challenge. What are we going to do about the workforce and moving the workforce? Because we have a decreasing number of young people. We're not a great payer. How are we going to persuade people that actually working in the charity sector is one of the ways that they want to give their career? What are we going to do about communications and making sure that actually government understands the incredible benefit that comes from working with the not-for-profit sector, the charity sector? I think we're sort of slightly a pat on the head and say, aren't we lovely kind of sector sometimes. I take the Covenant, which is at its element has good ideas, but it is slightly will all be nice to each other. I wonder which other sectors have a covenant as a way of operating. It will just be nice to everything good. So I think there's a whole variety of ways in which the charity sector needs to up its game. And I don't think there is a roadmap. And I don't know why there isn't a roadmap. But if you ask me to say, what are we doing now that will make the sector a better sector in 3 years' time or in 5 years' time? Collectively, what are we doing? Lots of organizations are doing things within their own organization. I don't think there's nearly enough answers to that question that make me go, great. I think that's going to be really effective.
Do you think it's partly because of the competition, Joe, for funding in particular? Is that a factor?
Well, it's sometimes a bit of a competition for grant makers. I think it might be. I think it's partly that the sector bodies haven't got together, and we are a bit obsessed with the fact that government should do this and government should do that. One of our instant knee-jerk reactions whenever something is wrong, say we need government to do something about our use of AI. Yeah. We need government, and you know what's going to happen this November? There's a budget, and in the budget we'll all be going, what will there be for charities? How are we going to make sure the charities, and then we'll go afterwards, well, that was a bit of a disappointing budget. It happens every single year in which we all think that the government somehow is going to do amazing things for charities. Oh, guess what? They don't. We need to start making our own weather a lot more. We start needing our own roadmap a lot more. I don't know why is the simple answer, whether it's competition, whether we're not, we talk the talk of collaboration, but we don't always walk the walk of collaboration. But I think the sector bodies should get together much more to work together to say, okay, what are the big things we can be doing to help people do a better job? Training and development of our people. So do we have the best chief executives in the world? We have some amazing chief executives. None of them, I would say, make it onto the platform of the really influential people in society. Why is that? Why aren't we being quite so influential at the individual or the collective level? I think we can go a lot more.
Do you think there should be more mergers?
No, not particularly. There are definitely some situations where it's like, I don't understand that. But I do have a big thing about people saying there are too many charities, because nobody says there are too many businesses, Why do we have 6 supermarkets to choose from? Wouldn't it be better we just have one supermarket? No, people like their choice. People like their variety in the business world. And I think the theory is that multiple charities are going to make multiple ways of making a better society. And if that's at the grassroots level. To give you an example, people might say, there are 15,000 organizations that help schools. Why do we need 15,000? They're called PTAs. You're going to have one in every school. You're not really going to say, you know what, you 3 primary schools should all have one PTA, because no parent raises money for some other kid's school, let's face it. So you're not going to merge all of those local grassroots bodies. And there's an obsession when we don't do it in the business world with saying we need less charities and not more. And the evidence that actually would make a better charity sector is pretty limited.
So Joe, I'm just reflecting back on when the sector did have a strong voice, and I'm sort of thinking about Stephen Bubb and Stuart Etherington, and when they were obviously chief executive of NCVO and Akivo. Is that what we need? Is a much they're a group at the pinnacle from the umbrella bodies doing that?
Well, I'm sure you're both avid watchers of Celebrity Traitors. And if you've been watching the latest episodes, you've been hearing about the big dog theory of traitors versus faithfuls. What you are kind of giving is, if you like, the big dog theory of making the charity work better. What I do think was powerful about it, and I was quite a critic of Stuart Eddington, what was powerful about, or was almost a rivalry between Stephen Bubb and Stuart Eddington, to profile and whatever. And actually, I'm not sure, in a sort of Roger Federer, Rafa Nadal sense, that rivalry was a bad thing. I think it was a good thing. I think it made both of them kind of up what they wanted to say and do things. I think there was a greater clarity about what we wanted to change about things. I think the big danger at the moment is that I think there's a lot of stuff about the sector is bad. What are we doing about it is what's missing. There's lots of good evidence about the difficulties, but yes, some good rivalry might be good. Some good collaboration might be good. Some good ideas in which we say, here are 3 or 4 ideas, let's take them forward. I think would be good. I wrote a blog the other day saying, why don't we have a set of standards saying how we judge whether a charity is doing a good job? Now we have that when it comes to people and investors and people. We have it when it comes to charity governance with the Charity Governance Code. But we don't have it for overall, is this charity doing a good job? And that means that you do revert to the how big are we? Are we growing fast? Have we done a good job? And that's a real shame, because a charity can be £1 million charity and make the biggest difference in the world. And if it grew by 10%, it wouldn't necessarily be 10% more effective. But it means that we have a focus on money, which stops us saying, actually, let's have a focus on impact. And impact and money are not necessarily in complete lockstep when it comes to the difference they make.
A final question from me. James, have you got any other questions you'd like to ask Joe?
No, you go for your life, Charles.
So Joe, I wanted to give you an opportunity just to talk a little bit about the Association of Chairs, and because you talk about you've joined boards to change things, so clearly there's a lot of change going on there. Just really where you see the future for the association, and what your vision is for it, or what the board's vision for the organisation is, and why people should join.
Okay, so the direction we're moving in is to work with whole boards, not just chairs, and partly because no chair is an island. You cannot have a great chair without a great board, and you cannot have a great board without a great chair. So the two need to work together. And that's why we have now introduced, as of spring of this year, a board membership. So everyone on the board can join, and we're getting more resources for the whole board, not just for chairs. And we'll continue to have sessions for both and so on. So one of the things we want to do is to reach more chairs. It frustrates me, and it's our own fault really, the number of times people go, I didn't know you existed, I've found your resources absolutely brilliant and whatever. But we have a sort of 1,000 members, individual and board membership, and what are there, 170,000 charities in England and Wales, plus a few more tens of thousands in Scotland and Northern Ireland. So we are scratching the surface, and actually we are also helpful for people who aren't charities too, not-for-profit boards. So we need to reach more people. I would love to have a mentoring scheme for particularly first-time chairs, because I think a lot of people, and it's a great thing, get to be a chair when they've never been a chair before, and they may not even have been a trustee before. But I think they need people to go, have you thought about this? What about that? Because being a chair is not the same as being a chief executive. That's where the culture of learning comes in. I've got this post, but I need to develop it. So I would love to have a mentoring program for first-time chairs, or any chairs. But we need funding. It requires coordination. It requires matchmaking. It requires how's it doing and so on. So I think there's that kind of thing. I think one of the things that we are doing more of is the kind of the consultation type of work to say, okay, where are we going? What can we be doing? How can we be doing more things? We're having a series of regional meetings. I'm going to Manchester in a couple of weeks' time to meet chairs in the flesh. And we've got to get out of London. One of the big dangers of charities is it's very London-centric, but actually reaching some of those organizations is quite hard work. I'm working with a little organization to try and develop a chairs network in the border areas of Scotland. Fantastic, because the smallest charity chair still needs help. Just because you've got a £10,000 turnover doesn't make your life miraculously easy. But how we support and get to and reach those people partly means our partnership with a variety of grassroots bodies who have those contacts, and we can bring some of the ideas, some of the things that work, some of the programming, and they may have people who need help. So there's a lot of collaboration in there. We collaborate with a lot of the other bodies, Young Trustees Movement, Honorary Treasurers Forum, Board Racial Diversity UK, and there's a lot more collaboration to come to make us a more effective organization and so on. But I would like us to be 10 times the size, because we would still be scratching the surface if we were 10 times the size, because there's so much need to make boards better and more powerful and more effective.
So does that mean you're going to change your name then? Actually, that's an unfair question probably to ask.
It's something we haven't talked about as a board. Yeah. I do get asked that question quite a lot. And I think what we need to make sure is that kind of a whole variety of things to say, what would it mean if we changed our name? But I did get a really interesting stat the other day, which is if you look at Google searches for the term charity chair in a month, there's about 40. If you look at the term for charity trustee, there's about 2,600. So there are a lot more people looking to be and wanting support perhaps on the charity trustee front than there are simply on the charity chair front. So it's an open question, is the rather long-winded answer to your question.
So maybe you might become the Association of Trustees. There we are. Anyway, I have a confession.
No. We'd never become that. I hate that term. Association of everything. And association is just such a meaningless term, you know. Because then what happens is you instantly get shortened to something else. You know, you've got AKIVO, which is actually the Association of Chief Executives of Volunteers. And in an online world, anything which instantly gets shortened is a bad name, in my view.
Yeah, no, I would agree with that, and I have a confession to make because I'm a chair of a charity and I'm not a member, so I shall rectify that going forward.
Please do. Join your whole board.
Well, I will endeavour to do so and persuade.
Because you know lots and lots, Charles, but the rest of your board may well want some of that insight and advice that comes with our amazing board membership for just a few £100 each year.
No, I think I think it's anything that trustees have an ability to tap in for help. And I love your idea of mentoring, because I think there are so many people who would do it, and also actually giving people an opportunity with particularly younger people who are in their sort of 20s and 30s who've never been a trustee, giving them an opportunity to I use the word shadow. I have to be very careful from a legal point of view about how you term it, but an apprenticeship, so that people can spend 6 months a year just observing a board and everything that goes on. Really, it sort of gives them confidence, because the time that I've asked people who are in their 20s and 30s of whether they're interested, most of them say yes. And if you ask the question why, they are fearful of the responsibility that comes with it, and it's the unknown. And that, to me, is actually something that we could resolve very, very easily.
The other thing I think is people go, what are you talking? What is being a trustee? You say, would you be a volunteer for this charity? They go, oh, yeah, I see that. A trustee. And I think a lot of people are like, what is being a trustee? Why would I do it? And one of the big sadnesses in the last year in the world of charities and governance is the demise of Getting on Board, because they did a fantastic job of getting a whole variety of people thinking about being a trustee, using their skills and so on.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Joe, thank you very much. I think we should call this to an end. That's absolutely fantastic session. James, as always, thank you to you. Say that we live in interesting times, and I'll be fascinated to see this roadmap hopefully being developed by the sector. Thank you for listening. We would love to hear from you. If you have any questions or want us to cover any topics, please do get in touch. Don't forget, you can catch us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, and on our various websites. Do share with friends and families. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much.